Take a look sometime at an old photograph. Not the polished sort, not the kind posed for a magazine, but a real family photograph. A gathering in front of a farmhouse. Men in suspenders, women in aprons, children staring straight ahead because holding still for the picture took effort. There is something about those faces and frames that stops a person, not because every one of them was perfect, not because there were no heavy people in the world back then, but because so many of them looked grounded in their own bodies, strong through the middle, capable in the legs and shoulders, not soft from sitting, not swollen from living against every signal their body was trying to send them, and I think that is worth wondering about, because most people today have been taught to think about body weight in one narrow way. They are taught to think it is mainly a moral issue, that if a person is gaining or cannot lose, the explanation is simple. He is weak, he lacks discipline. He is eating too much and moving too little, and if he would only get serious and finally force himself to suffer enough, then the body would obey. But the longer I have watched ordinary people struggle with weight, especially men after 50 and 60, the less I believe that story explains much of anything. I think what explains a good deal more is this. A great many people are not failing because they are lazy. They are failing because they are living in a way that constantly works against the body's own design. They are eating food that does not satisfy. They are drinking calories that barely register. They are sitting longer than any people were made to sit. They are eating heavily late at night, sleeping poorly, waking tired, and then wondering why they feel driven by hunger and low energy all the next day. They are trying to fix a physiological problem with sheer force and then blaming themselves when force runs out before the problem does. And that is why I want to say something plain at the start. For many people, especially older people, weight loss does not begin when they become more severe with themselves. It begins when they stop fighting their body in 10 different ways all day long. It begins when they start living in a way that gives the body fewer reasons to stay hungry, tired, sedentary, and overfed. Now I want to be straight with you because I would rather earn trust than sound dramatic. I am not telling you there is a miracle. I am not telling you age does not matter because it does. Hormones matter, medication matters, sleep matters, pain matters, diabetes matters, thyroid function matters, stress matters, muscle loss matters. And if a person has unexplained weight changes or real health concerns, that belongs with a clinician, not a storyteller. But it is also true that physiology matters. And when people finally understand a little of their physiology, a whole lot of shame can fall away. Because then a man sees that his struggle is not always a character flaw. Often it is a mismatch between the way the body is built to regulate hunger and energy and the way the modern world teaches him to eat and live. I knew a man once, 68 years old, not a made-up fellow, not a miracle case, just a decent, ordinary man who had carried too much weight for years. He had tried what men usually try. He skipped breakfast for a while, then he bought cereal because someone told him that was lighter, then he gave up bread. Then he joined a gym for 3 months, drove there in the dark after work, walked on a machine while staring at a wall, got home late, ate heavily because he was tired and hungry, and finally quit. Then came the protein bars, the meal replacements, the good intentions, the false starts, the Monday mornings, the discouragement. And if you had asked him then what his problem was, he would have told you what many men say. I just don't have the willpower. But willpower was not the heart of it. Friction was the heart of it. His whole day was set up badly. He would eat light in the morning, not because he was feeding himself well, but because he was trying to be good. By midday, he would get hungry, then eat whatever was easy. By late afternoon, he would want something sweet, or salty, or fast. By evening, he would be tired enough to mistake fatigue for hunger. Then he would eat the biggest meal of the day, at the hour when he moved the least and judged the worst. Then he would sit. Then he would snack. Then he would sleep short. Then he would wake up behind again. That is not a failure of virtue. That is a system pushing a man in the wrong direction from dawn to bedtime. And once you see that, the whole thing changes. Because now the question is not, how do I become harder on myself? The question becomes, how do I make the day easier on my physiology? That is a wiser question. The first place to look is hunger itself. Most people think hunger is simple. They think it is just the stomach getting empty. But hunger is more complicated than that. Hunger is influenced by the kind of food you eat, how much protein it has, how much fiber it has, how fast it digests, how quickly it spikes and drops blood sugar, how much chewing it requires, how processed it is, and how strongly it triggers or fails to trigger satiety. Diets higher in protein tend to improve satiety and can help reduce energy intake, while whole foods with more structure and fiber are generally more filling than foods that are stripped down, softened, sweetened, and easy to overconsume. C. That matters more than many people realize. A man can eat a large breakfast and still not feel properly fed if the breakfast is mostly refined starch and sugar. He can eat something marketed as healthy and be hungry again in 90 minutes. He can finish a muffin, a bowl of sweet cereal, a couple slices of toast, a glass of juice, and wonder why his appetite feels louder instead of quieter. But his body is not confused. It is answering the kind of meal it was given. Now compare that to a breakfast with eggs, plain yogurt, oats, berries, or even leftovers with real substance. Compare the soft, sweet, quick meal to the solid, savory meal. One tends to disappear into hunger again. The other tends to settle in and stay with a man longer. Not because of magic, but because the body is reading different signals. The same goes for lunch. If lunch comes out of a bag, a box, a drive-through window, or a package designed first for convenience and profit, there is a good chance it will not do much to quiet appetite for long. Ultra-processed foods are especially troublesome in this regard. In controlled feeding research, people eating ultra-processed diets consumed about 500 more calories per day and gained weight compared with when they ate unprocessed diets, even when the diets were broadly matched in several nutrients and participants could eat as much or as little as they wanted. Harvard Nutrition Source. That is a remarkable thing when you stop and think about it. It means the body can be nudged toward overeating, not only by greed or gluttony, but by the nature of the food itself. Food texture, speed of eating, reward value, processing, and satiety all matter. In other words, some foods make appetite easier to live with, and some make it harder. The modern world rarely says it that plainly because there is no money in plainness. There is money in selling a person food that is hard to stop eating, and then selling him a second industry to solve what the first one helped create. But the body itself is often straightforward. Give it food with substance, and it is more likely to settle. Give it food that vanishes quickly and leaves hunger half unanswered, and it is more likely to keep asking. The second thing older people often miss is how much trouble can come through a glass. This is one of the plainest problems in modern life, and one of the most ignored because it feels too small to matter. A sweet drink does not always feel like food. A soda does not feel like lunch. A sweet tea does not feel like dessert. A bottled coffee does not feel like a calorie load. A glass of juice can feel almost virtuous. But the body still has to deal with it. The CDC states plainly that frequent consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages is associated with weight gain and obesity, along with other health risks such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, non-alcoholic liver disease, tooth decay, and gout. CDC. That is why one of the most ordinary changes a person can make is still one of the most powerful. Drink more water. Drink unsweetened tea. Drink coffee without turning it into cake in a cup. Stop pouring easy sugar into a body already struggling to regulate appetite and energy. People often want a better trick than that. They want something exotic, something they can buy, something that sounds new enough to feel intelligent. But physiology is not impressed by novelty. It is impressed by repeated signals. And repeated signals are where the whole thing lives. A man does not gain most of his weight from one feast. He gains it from ordinary days arranged badly and repeated for years. The good news hidden inside that hard truth is that progress comes the same way. not from one heroic effort, but from ordinary days arranged better and repeated long enough for the body to notice. Now let me tell you something that older men especially need to hear. The goal is not simply to eat less. The goal is to make eating less effortful. That is a different kind of wisdom altogether. When a person is always white-knuckling hunger, always negotiating with cravings, always trying not to think about food, then whatever weight he loses often comes at too high a mental price to keep. But when meals become more satisfying, when appetite flattens a little, when blood sugar is steadier, when the late-night compulsion is weaker, then the whole thing becomes livable. That is why protein matters. That is why fiber matters. That is why meals with some structure matter. A bowl of beans, a piece of fish, a potato, vegetables cooked with some care, eggs, yogurt, lentils, soups, whole grains that still resemble grain, foods that make a person chew and slow down and finish with the feeling of being fed. These are old allies of a stable appetite. And now we come to movement, which the modern world has made into a miserable subject. When many people hear the word movement, they do not think of life. They think of punishment. They think of fluorescent gyms, blaring music, aching knees, mirrors, strangers, subscriptions, machines, and the embarrassing feeling of trying to get in shape among younger bodies. No wonder so many give up. But that is because they have accepted a modern lie. And the lie is this: that movement only counts if it looks like exercise. It is not true. The human body does not distinguish morally between a walk after supper and a walk on a treadmill. Muscle is muscle. Steps are steps. Time spent not sitting is time spent not sitting. The WHO defines physical activity broadly as all bodily movement that requires energy expenditure, including movement during work, transport, domestic tasks, and leisure, and it emphasizes that any physical activity is better than none and that adults should reduce sedentary time. WHO. That ought to free a lot of people. Because now a man can stop asking, what workout plan can I force myself to do, and start asking, how do I build a life with more movement in it? That is a richer and more hopeful question. Walk more, stand more, carry your own groceries, take the stairs when you can, park farther away, do some yard work, garden, sweep, clean, fix things, move during phone calls, walk after meals, break up long sitting. It sounds too ordinary to be powerful, but ordinary is exactly where bodies live. One of the most useful habits of all may be the walk after eating. Research on postprandial exercise shows that activity after meals, especially walking, can blunt the rise in blood glucose that follows eating. Even short walks after meals can be helpful, and in some studies, several short post-meal walks worked very well. MDPI. There is something almost beautiful about that. The solution is not always a heroic overhaul. Sometimes it is a man standing up after supper and walking for 10 minutes instead of sinking straight into the chair. Now think what that changes. It changes blood sugar handling. It changes how the evening feels. It changes digestion. It changes the sense that dinner is the end of all motion for the day. And small changes in evening rhythm matter, because evenings are where many people lose the thread. A lot of overeating does not happen because a person is truly famished. It happens because he is depleted, tired, bored, restless, mentally worn out. He wants relief more than food, and food happens to be the relief close at hand. That is why late eating is such a difficult trap. Not because night itself is evil, but because tired people make loose decisions. Research on meal timing suggests that eating later into the day and into the biological night may worsen metabolic outcomes for some people, while earlier eating patterns may support better glucose control. But the evidence is not strong enough to justify simplistic claims like, just eat breakfast and the weight will melt off. So the honest message is that timing matters, but it is one part of the larger picture. PMC. That honest message is enough. We do not need to exaggerate it. Here is the plain version. If a man eats lightly all day, arrives at evening over-hungry, eats his largest meal late, moves very little afterward, then snacks into the night. He is making the hardest part of the day do the most work. Appetite is usually less trustworthy then. Fatigue is greater then. Self-control is poorer then. The body is winding down then. That is not a good arrangement. A better arrangement is often simpler than people expect. Eat enough earlier that the night does not become a stampede. Let dinner be satisfying but not reckless. Walk afterward if you can. Do not turn the hours before bed into a second shift of eating. Again, this is not punishment. It is strategy. Strategy that respects the body rather than insulting it. Now, because we are speaking of older people, I want to say something about muscle that should be said more often. A man after 60 does not merely need to weigh less. He needs to remain durable. He needs legs that can rise from a chair, hips that can carry him upstairs, hands that can handle a bag of groceries, a back that can do ordinary work, shoulders that do not shrink from life. That is why strength matters, even in a conversation about weight. I do not mean a circus. I do not mean a bodybuilder's life. I mean keeping or rebuilding enough muscle that the body remains metabolically useful and physically independent. A little resistance training. Some chair stands, wall push-ups, dumbbells, resistance bands, carrying, squatting to a box, rising and sitting under control. Not all at once, not foolishly, not in pain, but consistently. Because muscle does not only improve appearance, it changes what a day feels like. It helps preserve function. It gives a body somewhere to put glucose. It makes movement less exhausting and life less fragile. And when movement becomes less exhausting, a man is more likely to keep moving. That is a quiet advantage with huge consequences. Most of what works in the long run works by reducing friction. That is worth saying twice. Most of what works in the long run works by reducing friction. A breakfast that keeps a man full longer reduces friction. A lunch with protein and fiber reduces friction. Not drinking 200 or 300 calories without noticing reduces friction. Walking after dinner reduces friction. Keeping some strength in the legs reduces friction. Breaking up long sitting reduces friction. Not arriving at 9 p.m. ravenous reduces friction. Sleep, that is a little better, reduces friction. A house with fewer snack foods calling from the cupboard reduces friction. This is the language many people have been missing. They have been using the language of war when they needed the language of environment and physiology. And maybe that is why so many men feel defeated, because they were told to conquer themselves when what they really needed was to rearrange their days. The 68-year-old man I mentioned did not lose weight because he discovered suffering. He lost weight because he discovered order. He started eating real breakfasts instead of performing restraint. He stopped pretending coffee could substitute for nourishment. He built lunches that were plain but solid. He stopped drinking his sugar. He walked after his evening meal, whether he felt inspired or not. He began doing simple strength work a few times a week. He did not outlaw every pleasure. He did not become fanatical. He simply stopped living in ways that kept driving his appetite, inactivity, and fatigue into one another. And then something happened that sounds small until you have lived it. His body stopped feeling like an argument. He was not thinking about food all day. He was not bargaining every evening. He was not going from saint to wolf between morning and night. He was not trying to repair each day with last-minute guilt. He was eating, moving, and resting in a rhythm that made more sense. The weight loss came, yes, not in a dramatic movie way, not in a before and after that shocks strangers, but in the better way, quietly, steadily, as a side effect of less conflict. That is the kind of change people trust once they feel it. Because it does not feel borrowed, it feels inhabitable. And that, in the end, is what most people need, not a program they can survive for 8 weeks. A life they can inhabit for years. There is something else I want to mention, because no one profits much from saying it. The plain way of living usually sounds too boring to market. No one gets rich telling a man to eat more beans and eggs and yogurt and fruit, to keep sweets for their proper place, to drink more water, to walk after supper, to stand up more often, to sleep better, and to lift a few simple weights 2 or 3 times a week. That advice is not exciting enough to sell with fireworks. The modern marketplace prefers stronger flavors, either indulgence without consequence or transformation without patience. First, they tell you to live in abundance with no restraint at all. Then they tell you to rescue yourself with extremity. First excess, then penance. First the food that ignores satiety, then the plan that ignores psychology. One industry fattens the problem. Another industry monetizes the guilt. The body wants neither story. The body wants conditions it can work with. And that is why I do not trust dramatic promises. I trust repeatable habits that line up with physiology. I trust meals that satisfy better. I trust fewer liquid calories. I trust a house where the easiest foods are the helpful ones. I trust walking after meals. I trust less sitting. I trust enough protein. I trust strength work scaled to the person. I trust a calmer evening. I trust a day with some rhythm to it, because if you give the body better signals, it often gives better signals back. Not perfect ones, better ones. Hunger gets a little quieter. Energy gets a little steadier. Cravings become less dramatic. Movement feels less foreign. The swing from good to I blew it gets smaller. A man starts to feel he can live this way without holding his breath. That matters more than people think, because so many have been trying to lose weight as if the task were mainly to suffer nobly. And suffering nobly is a poor long-term plan. A much better plan is to become easier to feed well, easier to move, easier to satisfy, and harder to throw off course. That is what I would want an older man to hear. I would not say to him, "You need to become young again." I would say, "Let us stop making your days harder than they have to be. Let us stop using breakfast as a place for sugar and starch without substance. Let us stop calling liquid calories harmless. Let us stop pretending the body does well sitting for most of the day. Let us stop saving the biggest appetite for the latest hour. Let us stop expecting one bout of punishment to repair a whole day arranged against your physiology. And let us begin somewhere kinder and truer. Let us build meals that satisfy. Let us put movement back into ordinary life. Let us walk after eating. Let us use our muscles on purpose. Let us shape evenings so they do not become a second day of hunger. Let us create some rhythm, because the body likes rhythm more than drama. That may be the finest line in all of this. The body likes rhythm more than drama. It likes repeated nourishment more than random deprivation. It likes regular movement more than heroic exertion followed by collapse. It likes satiety more than stimulation. It likes sleep more than late-night grazing. It likes to be worked with, not constantly corrected. And so perhaps the thing to remember is not that a 68-year-old man found a trick. It is that he stopped insisting on a fight every day. He stopped acting as if weight loss had to be a contest between appetite and shame. He began to understand that hunger can be influenced, that satiety can be built, that movement can be woven into life, that timing can help, that muscle matters, that liquid sugar counts, that ultra-processed food is often too easy to overeat, and that ordinary habits repeated faithfully are stronger than bursts of self-disgust. That is not a glamorous message, but it is a hopeful one, because it means a person does not need perfect motivation. He needs better conditions, and better conditions are often within reach. If you are listening to this and you feel discouraged, then do not begin by asking how to become harsher with yourself. Ask instead how to become wiser with your physiology. Ask what foods actually satisfy you for hours instead of minutes. Ask where the liquid calories are slipping in. Ask how much of your day is spent sitting still. Ask whether dinner is larger than it needs to be because the rest of the day was built poorly. Ask whether a 10-minute walk after meals could become ordinary. Ask whether your muscles are being used enough to stay useful. Ask whether the life you are living is making appetite louder than it has to be. Those are worthy questions, and for many people, they turn out to be more fruitful than all the noisy promises in the world. The truth is, the body is not your enemy. It can be stubborn, yes. It can change with age, yes. It can punish neglect, yes. But it is not waiting to betray you. Very often it is waiting to be listened to. And when you finally give it better signals, more protein, more fiber, more structure, less liquid sugar, fewer ultra-processed foods, more walking, less sitting, more strength, better timing, calmer evenings, it very often responds with better signals of its own. Fullness instead of endless nibbling, steadier energy instead of crashes, less compulsion, more ease, and sometimes quietly less weight, not because you won a war, because you stopped fighting a foolish one.